This is an SM Media production.
Hi folks, and welcome to part 18 of Chronicle, the Rangers journey, right here on SM Media. I'm Scott McPike. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host as always. We are now at the final chapter of this illustrious story. We look at the Steven Gerrard reign, what happened when the ex-Liverpool legend Steven Gerrard took over as Rangers manager and had an almighty quest to stop Rangers 10 in a row and restore some good times to Ibrox. To join me on this part of the journey, I couldn't think of a better guest for this part of the journey, considering the fact he's just wrote a book on this period, The Gerrard Blueprint. It's a pleasure to welcome to the show, Adam Thornton. Adam, it's a pleasure to welcome you on. Thanks for joining me.
No worries, Scott. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this one. This will probably be a subject that I don't imagine there'll be much notes sitting next to you.
No, it's a wee bit second nature after the podcast anyway, but then getting into the depth of it for the book for a year or so. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully it'll be second nature. But you never know, you might surprise me with a couple of the questions. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've kind of looked at it from a kind of tactical perspective as well as anything else, but there is a lot to get through here. That this is how much was this time needed for the Rangers support, because Rangers were coming from a bad period back in the SPL after 2 years. It was pretty grim. Gerrard just brought a level of excitement back, but how much was that need for a difference of approach needed at that time?
Yeah, I think it. Everybody always talks about any time there's a bad result now, of which there's obviously more than we'd like. They always talk about, I remember where we were 10 years ago, and I never really feel like that's applicable. I always feel like, to me, when Gerrard came in, that period done, that 6 years or so done, and it was time to move forward. So I think when you take it from that starting point, like one of the things I mentioned in the book is the last team that I think it was Jimmy Nicol put out in May 2018 had Jack Anick in goals, Russell Martin and David Bates as centre half, Jason Cummings up front, Sean Goss, Jason Holt, Jordan Rossiter as the midfield. If anybody thinks that we didn't make progress within that first 6 weeks, never mind the last 4 years, then I don't really know what to tell you. So it was absolutely needed when you just look at that team, regardless of everything that was going on round about it, and finishing third and all the chaos of Graham Murray and Pedro Caixinha, the chase for Derek McInnes, all that sort of stuff. Gerrard coming in, I think just even his personality coming in raised us up a good few notches. But obviously the proof is in the pudding. As we'll get into, it's fine being a superstar, and it does raise you up a little bit, but you need to be able to back that up with your actions.
And with Steven Gerrard, it's interesting. We're recording this just after he's lost his job at Aston Villa, and we'll probably get to that at the end, like when you kind of see the future for Gerrard as a manager. But at the time, he's obviously a legendary player. He's got that pedigree. He's the Liverpool under-20s coach, but he obviously had offers. I mean, I think it's well documented. He had an offer, but I think it was MK Dons. It was obviously a pursuit from the Rangers' perspective to try and bring him in. But what do you think it was about Gerrard and Rangers that kind of came together at that moment? Because it's a gamble at the time, it's certainly a gamble for both. You've got Rangers trying to obviously stop Celtic winning 10 in a row. It's becoming more and more real. And Gerrard's obviously his first job in management has to be the right one, because the first job can determine whether you're right for it or not. And you had this perfect storm, so to speak, with two situations kind of coming together. What was it for both, do you think, that kind of led this to eventually be an appointment?
So I think from a Rangers side, I remember that first press conference when Dave King was talking, and he said, when you're trying to appoint a manager, there's a lot that tick boxes, but probably nobody ticks all the boxes, and I guess that was probably more relevant at that point in time, dealing with the finances, dealing with the infrastructure around the club, all that sort of stuff. There's not many top level managers that were going to come in and try and take that on, working with relatively modest budgets. When you looked at Gerrard coming in, and I think it's absolutely played out that way in terms of what you want from a Rangers manager, in terms of stature and presence and standards that he's had certainly throughout his playing career. He ticks all of those boxes in terms of what we would be looking for from a Rangers manager. The only thing he didn't have was experience, but there's only one way to get experience. So I think from a Rangers point of view, if you have, I don't know, 5 boxes and you get only one person ticking 4 of them, and you know that experience part is something that he's going to learn on the job, and he's always been that kind of personality that will make mistakes, quite a lot of high profile ones. Certainly when he was at Liverpool, we make them, but he'll bounce back from them and it will grow. Then I think that's something that you can turn from a negative into a positive.
Yeah.
On the other side, then for Gerrard, I think he, for me, would need to be in that kind of environment where you absolutely have to be getting 3 points every single game. He said himself when he went to the MLS, it wasn't really what he was looking for. He would never be keen to drop down the divisions in England. He had to be in that elite environment. You could argue Liverpool, maybe throughout most of his time that they were there, weren't the elite in terms of the Premier League, but they still had those standards, or he would still maintain those standards within the club, and the various managers would as well. So I think he would need that. And he did mention, obviously, you said there about Milton Keynes had an opportunity to take over there, but I remember when he said it felt different when the job came from Rangers, and I think that is a big part of what we've just spoken about. So I think that would be the attraction from him. On the other side as well, you've got this opportunity where you can raise up a club who are huge. There's obviously European football there. Maybe it wasn't within grasp, or we didn't think it was within grasp in that first summer, but certainly as a kind of year to 2 year plan for them at that point, you'd have thought they'd be back in Europe. He'd be able to test his wits against clubs, maybe not to the extent that he went on to do. I think that probably outweighed his expectations. But when you factor all of those things in, he didn't have experience as far as the board were concerned. And then maybe on the other side, Gerrard thought he wouldn't have the financial backing that he might have had in the Premier League or whatever, but it was probably a really good starting point for him, that he could maintain those standards, build a philosophy, really understand how to build a big club up from, I mentioned that starting 11 there, so basically from scratch. I think there was only three or four players that played that game in Gerrard's first game, so being able to come in with an almost blank canvas and build something from scratch with that pressure from the fans as well was probably quite unique for him.
And you mentioned there obviously about the squad and how much it did need addressed, and there was a lot of kind of transition in that first summer. I'm just going to run down the players that left, and I'm going to ask you if you thought you were surprised that any players did leave that you thought maybe would have stayed, or any players you would have thought would have been kept. I've got one in particular I want to get your thoughts on. Kenny Miller went to Livingston, obviously, to take the managerial job. David Bates went to Hamburg for a development fee. That was kind of in the pipeline before Gerrard took over. Jordan Thompson, who's went on to have a pretty decent career, went to Blackpool. Liam Kelly went to Livingston. He's now at Motherwell. Michael O'Halloran left to go to Melbourne City. Bruno Alves, Harry Forrester, Fabio Cardoso, Declan John, Carlos Pena and Josh Windass all left in that summer. Any players you were surprised that left, or any players you would have personally kept?
I wouldn't say I'm surprised at any of them. In terms of players that you think might do a job under Gerrard in that first season, or maybe be slightly better than some of the players that came in, I'd maybe say Declan John, I think, could have been a pretty decent backup to what became Borna Barisic, when you think how much we had to rely on Andy Halliday and John Flanagan in that first season, possibly Barisic. Windass again would be one, but he was there, obviously. He started the season. He did okay. He might have been one, but again, if you're getting £2 million in for for him at that point. When there are maybe some more pressing priorities, if you think that went some way to Connor Goldson's fee or at Borna Barisic, those were the margins they were probably working at that point. So there's maybe only one or two that I'd have thought maybe as squad players, but there's nobody there that I was particularly devastated that left.
The thing with Josh Windass for me, and I don't know if you'll agree on this, is that I think we can both pretty much say that Josh Windass certainly thinks more about his own ability than probably a lot of people think of his. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. But he also had that thing. I thought that maybe one of those players like a Tavernier that you would earmark as maybe being able to go up another level or two, playing in a better team. But yeah, I would say so. There was a bit of ideas above his station possibly at some points.
Yeah, and I think that's showing with later on in his career. But some players that came in, I'll just get through them. The first three players in the transfer list, I thought they were probably coming in regardless of who got the managerial job. Scott Arfield, a return for Alan McGregor, and Jamie Murphy made his loan deal permanent. Those three signings, what was your thoughts on them? McGregor coming back is obviously the big one, but the goalkeeper situation is, as you said about obviously Wes Fotheringham and Jack Anik, they were decent squad players, but they were never a solid kind of Rangers number one. Particularly with McGregor, it felt like the right signing. Scott Arfield was a really good player down in England coming up, and we've seen what he's went on to do for Rangers. Jamie Murphy, if only he didn't go on that plastic pitch at Kilmarnock, I think he would have been a great player for Gerrard.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Murphy. Obviously you see what we were working with that January that he came in. And he did very, very well in that 6 months. Unfortunately, like you say, that came at a terrible time. And I think the same as you, we might have done quite well. I guess there's a sliding doors moment there. I'm not sure when the stars align on that. But if Jamie Murphy hadn't got injured, we might not have got Ryan Kent possibly, or it might not have been something that came in. So we'll never really know on that side. But yeah, certainly Scott Arfield, no brainer. We didn't have a midfield, so we needed someone to come in there and do what he'd done for Burnley. And I think you could argue that absolutely happened. And then McGregor, I was never as big, or I was never as down on Wes Fotheringham as others. I think he's proven now with Sheffield United that he's a pretty good keeper. I thought he was good with the ball at his feet. He just had this really unfortunate habit of letting in goals. He went through a phase where it was long shots that were turning him over time and time again. I thought he was okay, but when Alan McGregor, what was it at that point, 34, 35-year-old, just wanted to come back up the road, I don't think there's any debate there. So I'd have been happy with Fotheringham hanging around longer than he did in terms of backup, good competition, etc. But McGregor was obviously a clear upgrade.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously the one thing you said about the defence needed badly addressed, and two signings within 2 days. Nikola Katic from Slaven Belupo and Connor Goldson from Brighton. Two relatively kind of no-brainer signings as well. Katic has obviously came with a good background from Croatia. The Croatian market gets used later on, and Goldson, I think the lure of Gerrard was enough for Goldson to bring him up to Scotland. But again, the defence needed badly addressed, and these are two big statement signings.
Yeah, definitely. I think people want to see, young European players coming to Rangers. I think that's where most clubs want to see themselves. I think young, hungry guys coming from those kind of leagues, coming over for relatively small amounts of cash and really developing and going. Obviously, we've got a big affinity with Croatian players as well, so he's always going to have time on his side. Goldson, maybe slightly different. That was a fair chunk of money when he hadn't played for a couple of years. I don't think anybody could foresee just quite how much he would play for us and barely miss a game up until the present time, obviously with that injury. So when they came in, I thought Goldson was fantastic. Katic, maybe raw as you would expect, but those early weeks in the Europa League, I thought both of them gelled together very, very well. And I think Katic showed his strengths there, particularly in the kind of siege defending against Ufa and a few other games that spring to mind in those early weeks. I thought they gelled together very, very quickly and formed a pretty decent middle of the defence, if you like, with McGregor, which I think was key to getting us through Europe in the early season.
Yeah. Next one, John Flanagan from Liverpool, obviously an ex-teammate of Gerrard's. This just seemed to be a kind of a decent signing in terms of just being a utility man who could play both left and right back. It was a signing. Gerrard going to the well for somebody new and bringing in just somebody to kind of fill gaps when he needed them.
Yeah, and I guess never wouldn't have been a signing I would have made, I guess, for off-field things as well, but also the kind of career that he was having up to that point. I think it was clear that he maybe wasn't going to get any better. However, when you've got someone like Tavernier on one side, I think having a backup right back that can also play left back was pretty good. Like I said, finance-wise, that ticks a few boxes if you've got someone that can play both those positions as an experienced player and isn't going to moan if he isn't getting on the pitch. So I don't think he was anywhere near good enough throughout his time at the club. But again, in those early weeks and months, he proved his value, definitely.
There's a few loan signings in here I want to get your thoughts on. One in particular that's went on to do remarkably well considering the kind of the cameo he had for Rangers. First one was Ovie Ejaria. Obviously, Gerrard went into Liverpool and brought in a young player, young midfielder. Done okay. I just don't think he had the mentality for a club like Rangers. Umar Sadiq was the one I was going to touch on. Came from Roma. He's went on to do really well. Went on played. He's now at Sociedad. He looked very, very, very raw. Lassana Koulibaly started really well. Really struggled after that and never really hit the heights. Ryan Kent came in on loan. He hit the ground running straight away and went on to have a really good career for Rangers. And the final one was Joe Worrell from Nottingham Forest, who I wouldn't say was brilliant up here when he was at Rangers, but he's now a Premier League defender. What sticks out with the 5 loan signings? Just give us your thoughts on them.
Ejaria, yeah, I would say he was kind of the precursor to Aribo in terms of what we wanted from the midfield. But I agree with you. I think for whatever reason, I think he actually left a few weeks before the winter break, so possibly wasn't up to it, didn't fancy it. I don't know. But I thought he did relatively well for us. Obviously got that goal in Ufa. I thought he did okay, but consistency wise might have been a bit of an issue. Sadiq, I mean, there's been great players who have came to Rangers and not played well. I wouldn't ever get myself annoyed about we missed this or one that got away. That was never going to work at Rangers at all with Sadiq. So I don't really feel it's not a case of if we just kept him for 2 or 3 years he'd be worth 25 million. That's not how football works. So I don't really have much of an opinion on that either way. There's been worse players probably that have went on to get great moves, etc. as well. It's just one of those things that happens in football. Joe Worrell, I really, really didn't have a problem with, and I think the fans, and we do this a lot, I think there was a perceived personality with Joe Worrell, and he did mention a few times about heading back down to Nottingham Forest, and he was just up on loan. Rangers fans don't like that. We don't like to think that any player can ever think that there is a better club to go and play for than Rangers. Probably daft for him to say that, but I'm not sure it's a hanging offence for me. But I thought he was decent. Again, that mistake against Kilmarnock, he gets absolutely crucified for every time someone speaks to him. However, guys like Niko Katic have made bigger mistakes, but seem to get off with it. So I thought Worrell was absolutely fine. Again, when you look at the summer, and you've got guys like Philip Helander coming in, was spending, I don't know how much it would have been, probably 6-7 million on Joe Worrell. Ever going to be realistic for Rangers? No. Should we have spent that money on him? Absolutely not. I don't think he was good enough for us from that point of view, but I didn't have a massive issue with him in the same that the others seemed to.
Another final couple of signings, 2 signings from Croatia. One played both from Osijek, one played against Rangers, the other didn't, but came with a decent kind of reputation. Borna Barisic, we saw what he did against Rangers for Osijek. We'll get into the European campaign in a minute. Again, this Croatian market that Gerrard seemed to go into. What did you think of these 2 signings? Were you impressed with Barisic when you saw him against Rangers?
Yeah, I thought he did well in that Ibrox game. And we needed a left back 100% at that point. So it was a bit of a no-brainer, especially for the fee. Grezda I found a bit strange. It felt like a sort of 2-for-1 when you're going over there, but he was double the price or whatever it was. So again, another one you probably pin, same as Ejaria, who came and looked like he didn't fancy it, wasn't suited to it, whatever. But he was obviously the big wrong signing in that early window. I think more often than not, when we spent money, certainly that year and the year after, we tended to get it right. Other than I think Grezda. So he was the one that I don't even know if we really had high hopes for him, because he sort of came from nowhere, really. And he's not really went on to do anything else. So it's not even as if it's one that got away. It was just a bit of a strange one all round. I don't know if Barisic wanted a pal and he was the one that we brought over. I'm not 100%, but I think Barisic certainly more than made up for it.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. Kyle Lafferty was the next one from Hearts, obviously a return to the club. I remember when I was told about this, feeling like this was the wrong direction, but he did okay. Obviously, I think there was an attitude clash between Gerrard and Lafferty, but I could understand it now with the benefit of hindsight. Like, he obviously done really well at Hearts. He knew the Scottish game. He was a Rangers player. I think the big thing for me was the mentality was missing the season before, so that kind of made sense. What did you think of the Lafferty signing?
Yeah, I guess it's that. Do we need another striker? Yes, we do. Do we have a robust scouting network that can go and get us one at the minute? Probably not. Here's a guy scoring in this league that knows what it means to play for Rangers, that will be relatively cheap in terms of wages, etc. We'll try and get him in and see if he can offer a bit of value. Scored a few goals, but yeah, I don't think it was again one that really worked out at all.
No, it didn't. It was just we'll maybe get into that at the end of the season. But the European campaign, Rangers were obviously back in Europe, a dismal exit the season before, but Gerrard immediately hit the ground running in Europe. Skuppi, Osijek, Maribor, then a victory against Ufa, secured group stage qualification. Now, if you'd said a year before this, that the season after Rangers would win all 4 rounds in the Europa League qualifying, I thought I would have said you were probably crazy. But how big was that for Gerrard and Rangers to get that run going? And these were big games. These felt big, like particularly that away game against Ufa, where Rangers were down to 9 men and held on so much to try and get a result. It felt massive at the time.
It was massive, but I can't remember the exact numbers, but I don't think anybody had went from the first qualifying round right through.
I don't think they did.
At that point, maybe even just one club. It was massive because, like we've said, it was a summer of turmoil, bringing all those players in, starting so early. We've seen what happened the year before, with progress under Pedro, in terms of how quickly it can change. So it was huge. Some teams in there, Maribor, etc., that were a level above us at that point, I would say, in terms of their European competition, etc. So, getting through that, I wouldn't exactly say we got through with style. We did good in some of the home games. It was more about that sort of dogged defence, but it was massive, especially when we know what we know now about, I guess, our finances and how Europe, if you look at each of the years, Europe has allowed us effectively the budget to use on the team. Certainly in those 2 or 3 years under Gerrard. So it was massive from that side as well. And then obviously there's the prestige side of it as well. The fans had been through the absolute worst for 6 or 7 years. Having teams coming to Ibrox like Spartak Moscow, Villarreal, etc. was great from that point of view.
Yeah.
But getting through for me was a huge achievement. I think Gerrard said that himself at the press conference after Ufa. He felt like they'd relaunched Rangers, and I think you could argue he absolutely had, because that was 8 games of a team's first 8 games, essentially, trying to get through into a competition in a very difficult circumstances, and you have to get credit for doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the league start as well, it's a bit up and down. There's some last minute equalisers that deny Rangers wins away to Aberdeen and Motherwell in the first 3 games. The Celtic game, the first one, it was obviously Rodgers against Gerrard. I thought that game, I don't know if you'll agree, that Rangers were... I always felt Celtic were just the better team, but I think Rangers gave a good account of themselves that day.
Yeah, I remember that one just getting caught by a breakaway. I'm sure there was chat about it being a foul on Jack as well.
Yeah.
In the build up. Absolutely. I just remember thinking we're not used to these 2 games a week and coming back from Ufa and all that, taking its toll, etc. So my expectations of it were sort of tempered by that, particularly playing with 9 and 10 men for so long in that game. However, I don't think you could argue we were far off a draw in
Yeah.
it, which given the last couple of trips that we'd had to Parkhead before that would have been pretty good. So I wouldn't have said we were battered. I wouldn't have said
No.
we were great. I just felt that with the context of it all, a 1-0 loss was annoying, particularly the way that it came about. But I definitely thought we were in the game.
Yeah, and it does. Rangers do go on to do quite well in the league. Obviously, some big wins. It's a 7-game unbeaten run before that Aberdeen defeat at home. I remember being at that game, and that was a game Morelos and Cosgrove get sent off. But there's some. It was obviously. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be that Rangers were just going to come in and immediately hit the ground running. But there are some kind of frustrating. I'm thinking of December as well. I remember sitting with somebody and after the 4 games in November saying Rangers need to win all their games in December to have any chance of stopping Celtic. And they only won 2 of them before the Celtic game. And I just thought it was hard to find that consistency at that time. Like there was a lot of frustrations in there. I remember the Hibs game at Easter Road. Do you remember that? It was Rangers just put everything into it and just couldn't score on the night. It was one of those games where there's some kind of 1-0s, 2-1s, but I remember that Hibs game being really frustrated at just how Rangers just struggled to score, and it was just get into that Celtic game. It was before we get into the Celtic game, the run before that, Rangers did struggle to get a good run in the league going.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's funny because we always talk about how things kind of collapse a little bit after January or after the winter break. But when you look at that, like you mentioned there in terms of December, I remember that the 1-0 game against Aberdeen that you mentioned. We weren't great at all in that. And then I thought the Hibs game, I mentioned that in the book, actually, just not in terms of how good it was or anything, but just in terms of how the shape of the team, tactical shape was starting to.
I remember Barisic been outstanding that night. It was just nobody was picking up a cross from him.
Yeah, starting to come to the fore in there. So there was shoots of things from my point of view that I thought were quite good. But you're right. The month of December, if you're only winning 3 out of 6 or 7 games, then I think you're going to be in trouble anyway, in that sense. But I think you never want to say it was unrealistic. I think to expect that, particularly against that Celtic team, I guess, to expect that we were going to come and dominate the league against them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's ever realistic with the amount of money that we'd spent and the squad that had been left over in the summer. But that being said, there were some games in there that you think we might have been able to turn around. But again, it's the volume as well. When you think we were at that stage, we were 14 games in Europe added on to whatever else we'd had. It's a lot of effort and a lot of bodies trying to go that extra month to hit that winter break. I think the toll that takes on players that maybe haven't always been used to it is something that we don't speak about enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. But the 29th of December, a Saturday morning at Ibrox, Rangers played Celtic. It felt different. It felt a massive game. It was obviously Gerrard's first Old Firm game at Ibrox. And Ryan Jack scored the goal bang on half an hour, 1-0. And there was something about that game. From a tactical perspective, I think Rangers, there was a few key points in the game where Rangers just, you knew it was Rangers' day. I remember particularly the midfield that day just been outstanding. They just got to grips with Celtic. I had always thought anytime Celtic had played Rangers up until then, Celtic were far better in midfield and just had the midfield edge. But that day, Rangers were just outstanding and a very deserving victory.
Yeah, it was a fantastic day. I remember that very, very clearly. Obviously, like I said, it's the first victory in I don't know how long that would have been, 6.5 years or something.
Yeah.
From that Lee Wallace game. It was the goal. I really enjoyed the goal as well. Again, from a tactical perspective, because it kind of showed what we were going to see in terms of Kent taking it try to take it to the byline and switch it back. I thought that was a really good goal to win the game as well. And obviously Ryan Jack had become a really key player already under Gerrard, and he was one of the better performers the year before. So I think that, coupled with, like you said, the first victory for Gerrard, that sort of milestone before you move into the winter break to see what can be possible when you come back after it. I think all of those were significant, but I guess any victory against Celtic anywhere is significant. But that one being the first one in a couple of different ways, so the first one for a while, was absolutely massive, and it was a fantastic day.
Yeah, and then Rangers went on levelling points going into the winter break. Just a couple of signings I want to get your thoughts on that came in that January. Stephen Davis returned, obviously, from Southampton, and Jermaine Defoe came in from Bournemouth on loan. Two interesting signings. Obviously, Davis had changed, his game had changed so much since he was at Rangers, but again, it was another no-brainer. I think when you look at what he's done since, the way he can control a game, I think it was a player like that Rangers were missing. Jermaine Defoe, a goal scorer. There was a lot of talk about his high wage, but obviously he came in and he was relied upon to score goals. But these were two kind of no-brainer signings at the time, weren't they?
Yeah, I think Davis coming in was pretty huge in terms of the evolution of the team as well, because we just had sort of Ross McCrory or Ryan Jack sitting as that kind of deeper midfielder. So bringing Davis in meant that we could play through the lines a bit better from the middle and build play from deep, along with obviously Glenn Kamara. And I thought both of them really helped to shape in that 6 months after January. Both of them really helped to shape what we would see in the second season, and kind of become known as I guess the Rangers midfield shape for a couple of years. So both of them were key. Defoe, again, Lafferty hadn't really worked out, so we want somebody to come in and provide a bit of foil for Morelos. There was a bit of chat about him hopefully being able to impart some wisdom on Morelos. In two minds about whether that actually ever happened, considering the ups and downs that Morelos has gone through. But Defoe's record at the club in terms of goals, which ultimately is what he's there to do, can't be argued with. So given the finances seem to work okay on it, I think both those signings plus Glenn Kamara coming in puts that as a very good window.
Yeah, Glenn Kamara as well, 50 grand. I think it was, even though kind of when we're recording this, Glenn Kamara's kind of, his form's not the best, but you still can't argue the 50 grand has been unbelievable business. But Rangers obviously came back after the winter break, and that defeat against Kilmarnock, that Kilmarnock moved above Rangers, and I think Jordan Jones scored, and I think he'd signed for Rangers the day before or something like that. And it was, Rangers had just, I don't think the winter break thing's as bad as it would be the season after in particular, but something was missing for this Rangers team in terms of kind of putting that run together. As we say, the Celtic victory should have kind of installed this confidence that this Rangers team could match Celtic in terms of the league, and they just never were able to get that run going after that. Yeah,
and whether it's I don't for a second believe they went to Dubai and everybody just took a month's break and come back and thought they would scoosh the league. Whether it's a combination of the mental exertion of those first 6 months, the physical exertion of that number of games. Goldson, for example, having to play 30 odd games before Christmas, whatever it was, when he hadn't played that. He hadn't played 30 games in total for a couple of years or whatever. All those type of things, I think, absolutely have an impact. You've got guys like Ryan Jack and Morelos, etc., coming in who aren't used to playing 2 games a week at Aberdeen or in Finland or whatever, and they need time to adjust. I think there's a huge amount of mitigating factors in there as well that obviously they don't necessarily excuse it, so they're not fully mitigating, but there's a few things in there that I think we probably need to take into account. But I guess the interesting point about that is, like you said, it happens again the year after, so it maybe begs the question around, I don't know, mentality or consistency in the group of players, which you could argue we've probably still not answered fully.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm going to save the kind of cup games for a kind of segment at the end where we'll kind of do Gerrard's cup record as a whole. But Rangers are 10 points behind Celtic, get into March, and Brendan Rodgers, the Celtic manager, moves to Leicester City and is replaced by Neil Lennon. Now, at the time, I was always of the opinion that Brendan Rodgers was the the architect for Celtic success. I thought Neil Lennon was a backward step. I was quite glad when I heard Neil Lennon was coming in. What did you feel like at the time? Did it feel like a massive blessing that Rodgers had chose to leave?
Yeah, definitely. I felt the same as you. Obviously, history tells us now that maybe 2 or 3 years for Rodgers, maybe 2 or 3 years for most managers, to be honest, is their shelf life. People maybe get fed up with the message. I think from Rodgers' point of view, maybe not too dissimilar to when Gerrard left us. I think he was looking to take on to the next level, and I don't know if the finances were really there, or if he was wanting more control and the club weren't willing. I don't know. Whatever happened at that point, it's not for us to decide. But swapping Brendan Rodgers for Neil Lennon is always a good move for your rivals. I would have thought. I guess again, like we spoke about there, the big disappointment is that we weren't really able to capitalise on it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the Celtic defeat Rangers, obviously, it was a difficult day for Rangers. Morelos getting sent off, and obviously the situation at the end, and Celtic just won the league that day, I would say. But Rangers, it gave you a lot of optimism getting into the next season. Rangers would win their next 6 games, and obviously it ends in a 2-0 win against Celtic, where I remember texting my dad that day. My dad was on holiday and texting. He said, "What did you think?" And I said, "It's the best I've seen Rangers and the worst I've seen Celtic in 3 years." And a lot of people shared that thing that Rangers weren't even out of third gear and played. I know that Celtic team had obviously won the league and maybe their foot was off the gas, but they were really, really poor that day. And it just felt like going into the next season, there was a lot more confidence that just a couple of a tidy up of the squad a wee bit, and Rangers would be in a good position.
I think that was fair. That 2-1 game in March after that was another couple of tactical tweaks. That's when we moved from just playing wingers and started playing the 2 number 10s to get more support to the striker. We scored 3 goals in our next 3 games, and you can argue that it worked in that sense. And then we also started using that kind of flatter midfield 3 that we've spoken about, with Davis, Kamara, and Jack coming in and letting the fullbacks get even further forward to support. So that, I agree with you, the league was lost that day. However, we used those 6 or 7 games at the end of the season to our advantage, and were able to put in the bedrocks of the next couple of seasons in terms of the tactical principles. So always not lost, I guess, in that sense, albeit you'd rather be winning those games to win a league.
Yeah, absolutely. And get into the next season during the summer, not as big a blitz as there was the season before. Just a couple of players come in. Jordan Jones, Greg Stewart, Jake Hastie didn't really do very much in a Rangers shirt, but George Edmondson was a project that didn't really work out. Joe Aribo was the one that probably from that summer that you would say was probably the signing. It was that I always thought that season, the first season under Gerrard, Rangers were missing that proper number 10 who could really fit, similar to maybe a Tom Rogic, who could just find a space and attack. And Joe Aribo seemed to tick that box and straight away hit the ground running and looked a really, really impressive signing.
Yeah, he absolutely did. I have been through a bit of a journey with Aribo, I think, in terms of the praise that he sometimes used to get. I didn't feel was quite at the level of the performance scene, but there's absolutely no denying in terms of how skillful he was as a footballer. And what I think he did was he added in a bit of unpredictability to what was a pretty rigid system. You got someone like that in who's a natural number 10, but we kind of play with those 2 number 10s. He kind of didn't fit really where we had gone. However, he was able to come in and play as that kind of right side number 10. He even played left sided. He played all 3 positions, centre mid. He even played left back a couple of times in that first season as well. So that, I guess, flexibility but also unpredictability that he could bring to the team was huge. Scored some massive goals for us, particularly in Europe. And I thought it was a really, really smart sign at the time, especially given how cheap he was in the cross border, and then the performances that he put in for us over there.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously as well, European qualification was sealed again. It was a bit more dramatic. It was just as dramatic as the season before. The victories over St Joseph's, progress in Idercorn, Michelin. I remember the Michelin game feeling that was a big turning point for this team because the way they just controlled both games really well. and an Alfredo Morelos header sealed the qualification against Legia Warsaw in the second leg. And the league campaign for the first 3 games, it started well. A good start against Kilmarnock, a late goal from Connor Goldson, a really impressive 6-1 win against Hibs. Barisic free kick, which I think was a turning point for him at St Mirren. But going into the Celtic game, there was a lot of confidence going into this game from a Rangers perspective, but that confidence went about 11:30 on the Saturday when Rangers team came out, and it was just a completely wrong team for that game.
Yeah, it was a bit strange, wasn't it? I don't know whether that was.
What do you think it was, like, from a tactical perspective? Do you think it was just trying to match Celtic's physicality, or it felt the wrong team?
The cynic in me suggests that maybe something had gone on with Morelos in terms of. I know we see later on in that season that he doesn't come back from Colombia in time. I don't know if there was something going on there, but it seemed like a very, very strange move to me, particularly when you think how well he had started the season, and also how well he would go on to do in that season. It seemed a little bit strange to me. Wasn't a big fan of Flanagan and Katic playing in that game. I thought that played into Celtic's hands. They just basically left both of them on the ball and asked us to come and break them down. Particularly when they got that goal.
And it was that weird game, as you say. It was probably lost before the game even started. But Celtic were just they had a lot of new players coming in, but I think the situation just suited Celtic far more than it suited Rangers. But Rangers bounced back really well. They go on a good run before Christmas, and it feels a bit different. They're going on a consistent run. I'm just looking through here. There's only one draw between September and the start of December. Rangers are beginning to get a run going here, and it's looking a lot likely that Rangers are mounting a challenge.
Yeah, we only dropped. I think it was one defeat to Celtic and 2 draws in the first half of the season.
Yeah,
up to the winter break. So we were absolutely flying. Morelos was scoring goals at 29 before Christmas. I think he ended up getting. Obviously, the League Cup final, which we'll come on to, I guess, later on, is a big.
Do we have to?
No, it's a big black mark on it. Europe as well. We managed to get ourselves through. We're doing fantastic in there as well. It was a really, really good start to the season, and to me, this was. I don't want to say that this was the best of Gerrard's tenure, because I think the season after, obviously, there's some fantastic bits in here, but this was certainly the most exciting. I thought, in terms of how the team went after opposition. This undisputably for me was Morelos' best 4 or 5 months at Rangers. You think of those goals against Feyenoord and Porto, etc. I thought he was absolutely phenomenal. And I don't think he's ever really recaptured that. We'll go into all the debates about whether he became a better player the year after or not. I don't think so. I think when you've got a player like this and you see him playing in that way, why would you change anything about him? If I'm honest. So for me, this was probably the most exciting and engaged I felt in it. I don't know if it was because we were at all the games and we were taking teams apart. There's a 4-0 Ross County. There's a 2 5-0s in a row against Hamilton and Aberdeen. There's a 4-0 against St Johnstone. It was a bit of a domination that we were going on. The only issue that we had, obviously, was Celtic were just about matching it, I guess, in that sense, which was a big surprise under Lennon. But yeah, I thought this was a very good run, and certainly one of the best under the management team.
Yeah, I felt as well. Let's see the difference between the Hibs game I spoke about the season before, where it was a 0-0 Easter Road, very frustrating just before Christmas. And then the season after, it's a 3-0 win, and it's I think Rangers 2 goals in the first 10 minutes. You saw that difference, and as you say, that ability that I think we see now with a Rangers team, whereas there's not that drive to go and actually take 4 or 5 off a team. Gerrard did have that mentality, especially at this point, because they trusted the way they played, and this is what I noticed about this time, is particularly with that Hibs game. The parallels between the first season and the second season are in that game itself.
Yeah, I definitely think this is the peak of the style, like you mentioned there. That's a nice little 12-month comparison between both those games, the 3-0 win and the draw. And then you look at when we're playing against Porto at home and we're playing against Porto away. The style was absolutely spot on. We were inch perfect in that game in terms of how they wanted us to play. So for me, I think it was probably the high point. Obviously, we're going to have success the year after. But in terms of how we wanted to play, I think that was probably getting to the point where we thought this is actually quite appealing and quite exciting.
Yeah, and we mentioned it. We have to talk about it, despite it being one of the sorest days I've ever had as a Rangers fan. The 8th of December, the cup final at Hampden against Celtic. There's so many things. You could probably do a full podcast in this game as a whole, because there was so much to get into. But Rangers just couldn't score. They have the stats of the game are unbelievable from a Rangers perspective. I think it was 20 shots in goal and Rangers just couldn't score. How many chances did Morelos not put away? And Celtic, their one chance of the game, it is offside, but they get the goal through Julian. And what felt at the start of the game is this would be the turning point. This is where Rangers would arrive and knock Celtic off their pedestal, stop this trophy run that Celtic were on. But it just felt horrendous that day, and there's no other word for it. It was just I would say it's probably the sorest day I've had in a long, long time, particularly from on the field. An on the field game. I can't think of a sorer day than this as a Rangers fan.
Yeah, it's the manner of it, like you said, where it should really be a pretty convincing 3 or 4-0 victory. You think of the whole penalty debacle as well. Don't know why Tavernier gives it to Morelos in the first place, but Morelos is never scoring that penalty. It doesn't strike me as someone who should ever be taking many penalties anyway. But yeah, horrible weather, horrible day. And it sort of sucked the life out of me a little bit. Like we said, we'd been going great guns there. And to be fair to us, we do rally and we do get a number of wins in that month leading up to the break, none more so than the win against Parkhead, which I was lucky enough to be at. But I just don't know, mentally, for some players that had maybe been there for a while, that mental block of getting over the line. The League Cup is always really, 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 really good for that. I've seen that under Advocate, under McLeish. Getting that first trophy under your belt and giving you that taste of success is huge. And who knows, even though we sort of rallied, you can imagine Gerrard just battening down the hatches and saying, let's get through the next 4 or 5 games. But then when you're away on the winter break, maybe that mentality creeps in again. You think we couldn't go over the line in that game when it mattered, despite how we played, despite all of it. What is it going to take? Those type of questions you'd imagine come back in when you've had a bit of time to reflect on it. So that's one that I think might have had a bit of an impact when they come back after January as well, particularly. And again, I hate saying it, but when Celtic come back after January, they were absolutely blowing teams away. So
yeah,
they could have took the incentive from that as well and got the bit between their teeth for the home stretch, whereas we maybe went the other way.
Yeah, and you mentioned there obviously about the Celtic victory at Parkhead in December. That felt monumentous as well. But I think no matter how big that result was, the celebrations after the game, I think, was a turning point for the team, because I think this team had they felt themselves they'd maybe avenged that defeat at Hampden, but they'd also this was their really homecoming. This is where they felt they could go and win the title. And I think if you'd said to Steven Gerrard to have this time again, he would not have allowed that to run up to the camera and things like that, because it would just, when you look at what happens after it, you can't help but notice that the celebrations that day.
Yeah, I think this was a big win because it was the manner of it. We dominated. They had that goal, which I think was that a handball as well? Something happened with that with Edward's goal. I think he handled it, or there was a foul or something like that. But we were great. I think Ryan Kent's goal is one of the best goals that we've scored at Parkhead in terms of the build up play, the quick attack, etc. And then obviously everybody loves a bullet header. So that was the one game. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that took us, was it leveling points with a game in hand, possibly. At that point, which was huge. We hadn't obviously won at Parkhead for a long, long time before that as well. So it's always a difficult place for us to go and get a victory when you compare it to previous years. Obviously, we've had some really bad defeats in the recent past there. So fantastic from that point of view. And it does, for the second year in a row, leave us going into the winter break on a high and hoping or expecting, I guess is probably the right term, expecting us to come back after the break and see how things go.
Yeah, and after the winter break, Rangers go to Dubai during the winter break, and after what we were talking about just before December was the way Rangers were playing. They were so fluid. The attacking element was definitely there, and after the coming back, and I remember that Gerrard game being horrendous, and you've got games at 1-0 against St Mirren, a 2-1 defeat to Hearts, 2-0 at Ross County, 0-0 against Aberdeen, 2-1 against Hibs, a 2-1 defeat to Kilmarnock. It was what changed in that when they come back from Dubai, because something definitely did, and it was the fluidity that we had saw just wasn't there in the league.
I think that's the big question, isn't it? You think
it's $1 million question, isn't it?
Because you always think, is it maybe the management? You naturally think is the message is not getting through to the players anymore, even though it is only 18 months or so. The manager himself was doing quite a bit of soul searching after that Tynecastle game where he mentioned he was considering what he wanted to do in terms of his future and things. I think it would be easy enough to say that and to say that he was probably heading towards the sack, and I think that's probably a realistic possibility.
Do you think that? I've always wondered that. Like when you look at that time, like the Hamilton defeat, and I remember I was sitting in a pub in Benidorm during the Ross County game, and it was so bad. It was a Ryan Kent goal. It was 1-0, but Celtic were the weekend after, and I remember sitting talking to somebody. If Celtic come to Ibrox and win comfortably, would they pull the trigger? I've always thought they wouldn't, but it's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. We're just kind of assuming. You're right in terms of the board. Not, I wouldn't say they were rash to act on anything. Rangers boards have never really been rash to act on managers at all throughout my 37 years on the planet.
Through this journey, they haven't either.
No, so, but when you look at it and you think 4 wins out of 9, and then another 10 or 11 games, whatever it was, left to go, already out of the cups. Obviously, we still had Europe, which might have been the saving grace for that year. I don't know. It depends we're probably at the same juncture just now with Van Bronckhorst. It really depends how bad those last few games had got. Had we stumbled through similar to we did the season before and finished off with a 6 or 7 or 8 game win, maybe things would have been okay. Would the manager himself have decided something was amiss in the summer, or I really don't know. In terms of what happened, I don't know. But one thing's for sure, it wasn't great at all. And as we get into this sort of COVID period, I think it's really interesting, the discussion, I think, around just exactly what Gerrard and the coaching staff did in that 4 or 5 month period with no games, because it was a big reset of mentality, reset of what the players wanted to do, marginal gains in terms of tactics and set pieces and all that sort of stuff. So whether or not, I don't think that could have happened 100%. That couldn't have happened without the COVID interrupted season. So I guess it's a saving grace in the sense that what happened this season after, but it doesn't make that 2 or 3 months after the 2020 January break any more palatable.
No, and as you say, COVID, the famous virus comes in at the middle of March. The season's kind of postponed. We could get into talking about what if the season would have resumed. Would Rangers have been able to claw it back? And it's one of those what ifs that you'll never get the answer to. I think we all know that boat was going through the gut regardless. But we're here to talk about the football, and that was just a farce. But the summer was interesting because Rangers had obviously beat Braga in the Europa League, and were playing Bayer Leverkusen. The Bayer Leverkusen game was the 3-1 defeat, where Leverkusen were very good that night, but Rangers still had that to finish. But going into that summer, I'm just looking at this is a summer where Rangers don't have to do much transfer activity. I'm going to get your thoughts on something that possibly happens, that maybe 2 of these players maybe don't sign if this player was rumoured to be going. But the summer, we knew it was going to be no fans. We knew it was going to be a lot different, but it felt different. It felt that this was Celtic had obviously got their 9th championship, and this was make or break. Did it feel like a make or break season to you? That this the last transfer to stop 10?
Yeah, I think I was never really too bored about the whole 10 in a row thing, but I think certainly in terms of Gerrard, if as we said how close it got the year before, I don't think we'll ever really know, but certainly in terms of Gerrard, I don't think there was any doubts that if he wasn't able to get the title in this season, I think everybody would have seen it as a parting of ways in the summer after that, 100%.
Absolutely. And some of the signings, I want to get your thoughts. A couple of that, Hadji had obviously made his deal permanent after really impressing in his first few months. Calvin Bassey coming in from Leicester, a project player, but has been on to do really well. Leon Balogun, a defender, just to kind of top it up. But the interesting two signings here are Kemar Roofe and Cedric Itten. Adam, do you think these were signings to play with Alfredo Morelos, or the event that Alfredo Morelos would be sold?
No, I think that was those two were coming in to replace. I just think the way that worked with the both signing, was it on the same day? It was pretty close.
Yeah, it was.
Anyway.
Yeah, it was. I'm sure it was the same day.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that was an in and out thing, particularly when you think about how the finances then went on to look over the next 18 months or so in terms of transfer fees, etc., that we didn't pay out. Yeah, I think 100%. That was the year. I think he was very, very heavily rumoured for Lille before they went and got.
I think it was Leland Porto, was it?
Yeah, before they went and got Jonathan David. Again, we don't know how close it got or anything like that, but I think he was very, very, very close to going at that point. And obviously he'd had the discipline a couple of months before. And for me, I was expecting that Morelos went in that window, and I think we had that. Maybe we got too far down the line with Roofe and Itten, sorry. Maybe we decided that we'll bring them in and then he'll be going after a week or after 2 weeks or whatever. Yeah. For whatever reason, we were kept with all three of them, but I definitely think that was a 1 out, 2 in situation.
And the obviously this season is unique for many reasons. The fact that it was a lot quicker. It was starting the 1st of August, and Rangers don't play Celtic until the 17th of October. But Rangers start, really well. 2 draws against Livingston and Hibs. It felt weird at the time, but Rangers were just in a massive run at the start of this season. You could just see there was something different. And as we say, that start of we'll touch on the Celtic game in a minute, but the first few games of that run were really, really impressive from a Rangers perspective.
Yeah, I think we've seen an element of, I mentioned earlier on the season before was maybe the peak in terms of the exciting, aggressive football. But I think in this 6 months in particular, we've seen most of that still there, but a lot more control from Rangers, in the sense that we weren't getting caught in transition as much. We were able to dominate play, and I think a large part of that was having Helander and Balogun in there beside Golson to be able to control things, but then also having Joe Aribo into his second season and Yanis Hadji, Scott Arfield coming into form in central midfield as well, who was able to work off the ball just as well as he worked on the ball. I think the three of them, certainly Arfield, Aribo and Hadji, were pretty huge, both in terms of numbers. Hadji finished as the top assister in the league in Scotland. And then Arfield and Hadji linked up very well. There's ones that spring to mind: the goal against Galatasaray for Arfield, Arfield's goal against Hibs. There's a goal against Dundee United as well. We went through a wee spell in the summer where they were playing those kind of quick balls up to each other, interplaying in the centre of the pitch and breaking through the defence to score. So I thought that control that we had and ability to attack was fantastic. Then this season for me was, I know it's about the team and it's about control, but there really were a number of patches in terms of who stepped up to the plate. I think we started with Ryan Kent scoring quite a few goals early doors, certainly against Aberdeen and a couple of other ones. Then Arfield and Hadji sort of come to the fore. Then just as you're sort of getting to the nitty gritty, Kemar Roofe pops up and has 10 goals in 10 games just before Christmas. So I think that 4 or 5 months there was about the team, absolutely, and I think the fact that we managed to share the burdens there was fantastic. And that game against Celtic, we spoke about the 2-1 game nearly a year before. I think that probably sums up the improvement or the evolution of the team a bit more, because the first game was obviously pretty frenetic and we managed to get the win. that 2-0 game, we dominated Celtic in a way that I don't think I've seen for
I don't think I've ever seen as dominating a Rangers performance at
no,
Parkhead.
for a long time. Okay, it was 2 goals from a centre half, but they couldn't lay a glove on us at all.
No.
It was even more of a domination as far as I'm concerned as some of the Parkhead games that we've seen in the last couple of years where Celtic come out and swarm us from the start, but then maybe take their foot off the gas a little bit. I thought we didn't really get out of first gear for the full game.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned there obviously about that Celtic game, but you talk about some games that won the title. The 3-1 win against Motherwell always sticks out to me because Rangers go behind to an early goal, but Roof and Itten come in, score 3 goals in the last kind of 15 minutes. And you talk about a game where it changed, it felt different. I would say this is the game because I don't think Rangers won that the season before.
No, I completely agree. I think you're right. I think that was the big difference, 100%.
And then obviously the January game against Celtic where I thought Celtic did play better in the first half, but Rangers just kept going. They obviously got the bit of luck with McGregor's own goal, but that ends Celtic's chances because Celtic, although we're looking at now and Celtic's capitulation is there to see, but Rangers just didn't stop. It was relentless. I know it's a word that's been done to death, but Rangers were just outstanding in that whole period, and just those games that Celtic were probably better in the first half, but Rangers just settled in. Obviously, the red card, and then get the luck, and that felt the day that won the league. I would say.
No, definitely. Yeah, I think I was pretty comfortable, to be honest, after the coming back to win late against Motherwell when we got when I think we were 1-0 down up until about 75 minutes and we won 3-1. That to me, particularly because it came right after losing in the League Cup to St Mirren. You think about the setbacks that the team can have. Obviously, we were very, very far ahead at that point. I don't know what it was, maybe 10 or 12 points at that point, but you always think of collapses that have happened in the past couple of years. So getting that over the line against Motherwell was a big win for me. And then that game absolutely seals it. The one that you mentioned. I don't think we were great at all. I think Celtic, as you said, had the better of the play, but we got a bit of luck there. I guess in hindsight, you could maybe argue that we should have been heeding some of the warnings that maybe came in that point in terms of being a little bit stuffy, being hard to beat, and trying to rely on getting goals in key moments. Maybe we should have been trying to imprint our style a little bit more on them at that point. But when you're that far ahead in the league and it's all about them having to come in and desperately get a win, and you're quite happy even just getting out of the game with a draw, I think that game was absolutely job done.
Yeah, and you mentioned as well, obviously just how comfortable Rangers are. There is this mixture of the way it crumbles at Parkhead, the fact there's no fans, and the kind of way Rangers are just. Do you think there is this perfect storm where it all just clicks at the right time, like everything falls into place and Rangers take advantage of it? Like I've always wondered that, like particularly now, obviously, kind of that season. After that season, we thought Rangers would build on it and go and win title after title, but it hasn't worked out that way. And is there a case that maybe it was down to a lot of it was down to the no fan situation? Like, what's your thoughts on it?
I don't think so, because how do you quantify it when you think the Europa League final run last year is for me arguably more impressive than I was going to say arguably more impressive than winning the league title, but it probably is, to be honest. Maybe not the league title that we won in terms of the importance that we attach to it, but you certainly have to beat higher quality opposition on the way there. So I don't know, that one's a bit of a lazy argument for me. Maybe you could argue that it might have affected other teams in other ways, but that's not really our issue. That's like saying That's like saying you don't deserve to win a cup final if the other team's got injuries. Like, each team adapts to the environment, and if you can't adapt to anything, then you aren't successful. So using something to your benefit that affects everyone doesn't mean that you have an advantage. Everyone has the capability to use whatever to their advantage. So I would say that is a bit of a lazy thing for me. I don't really subscribe to that no fans thing at all, particularly when you see how well we played in Europe in higher pressure environments the year later.
Yeah, and as we say, it's that thing as well where Rangers do really well in Europe that season as well. The getting through, obviously playing Benfica, topping that group with Benfica in it and things like that. Rangers they are a different animal this season, and I think that would have happened regardless. But the games I want to touch on, Rangers obviously sealed that championship against St Mirren, and the whole reason we're going to end this journey at this point is because what did that do for the Rangers fans? That title win, you saw George Square that day and things like that. It just felt like the culmination of this horrendous journey that fans had been on since 2012.
I think that was it. Absolutely. Like I said, for me, it was really the ending of two journeys. Gerrard's job when he came in was to win the league 100%. I think that was his main ambition. It maybe took him, I was going to say it took him a year longer than maybe people would have liked, but not when you compare the start as we spoke about. I think for me, 3 years is just about par there. When you think of the financial gulf there was between Rangers and Celtic, you factor in having to play in Europe and having to get that extra revenue and still being behind in terms of finances and everything that we had to deal with throughout that. I think for me, from the start that we had to 3 years, I think that's about fair. But then the wider journey, as you mentioned, going from 2012 through, I think did give an element of closure, and I think the fans absolutely celebrated as they should do. I put a lot of importance on it, and I think it isn't for me about stopping the 10. It's about getting Rangers back to winning leagues, which I think it should always be the expectation every year. But unfortunately, for the reasons that we've mentioned, wasn't for a few years. But for me, I was quite pleased with it or delighted with it from a tactical point of view as well, because of that incremental improvement. Wanting to see a Rangers team that plays football and that does it in a way that you see other teams playing in other leagues, and actual other fans want to come and say, wow, you guys played that way against Porto. That's incredible. How brave is that? That's brilliant. With the finances, etc., you've got for too long, even under Walter Smith, and we got all these victories and stuff, it was people were taking the piss out of, you've got 7 defenders in the park and 3 strikers, and it's so rudimentary up there. Having something come in that was contemporary at the time and was happening in England and happening in Italy and happening in Spain, in terms of attacking fullbacks and inverted wingers and all that sort of stuff was good for me as a kind of football fan, being able to actually talk about my team at that level as well. So there's lots of little aspects of it that I think will be pleasing to fans, but obviously just getting that title back after 10 years was huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have put it better myself. The one stone you could maybe throw at Gerrard, despite his European run was really good as well, but cups. Now there's a few cup exits in there. You would probably like to have your way again, but the one stone you could probably throw at Steven Gerrard for his time at Rangers was his cup run. What's your thoughts on that? Because there's a few bad defeats in there.
Not good enough at all. I think when you think about how far ahead we were in the 55 season, I think definitely a double should have been the minimum, but a treble was absolutely within grasp. So that for me was the big thing there. Those kind of one-off type games where he can go in and just go at a team, but maybe isn't quite as good at the whole consistency in terms of building a team that can go and dominate every league game. So maybe kind of be too harsh in that season. But League Cup final, as far as 2019 is concerned, and then going out against Aberdeen, it's unacceptable even before you get to Hampden, and then the season after, to not even get to Hampden, I think is absolutely unacceptable. So I think the cups, arguably got worse rather than getting better, which is not what you want at all. And I think overall, hopefully people are in agreement with this, but I think the team and the manager, for what they put into that spell, deserved at least another couple of cups, maybe even 3, you could argue. So I think from that point of view, obviously it's on them, but from that point of view, I think it's a shame because 3 or 4 cups there are no doubt amongst even casual observers in terms of how good a job they've done.
Yeah, and the Steven Gerrard legacy for you, what the 3 years that Gerrard was there and won the title, obviously he leaves later on, we'll maybe touch on that next week, but what does that run and those 3 years kind of do for you as a Rangers fan?
I think it brought us back, first of all, and like I said, it gave me so much knowledge and insight into things that I'm interested in. Tactics, like I said, having a keen interest in it before, but never really been able to apply it to Rangers much because it wasn't really what I was seeing. So having that gives me more interest in tactics, and it adds another dimension to how I'm watching football as a Rangers fan. So from that point of view, just seeing a team go from scratch to dominating in the way that we did is something that I'll be thankful for. But most of all, it has to be that League Cup, the league title. I think that's 100% what he came to do, and winning it in such a way, being unbeaten, winning it in record time, creating the British record in terms of goals against, etc. were all hugely memorable things, and I think we'll look back on that once we get a bit more distance and we sort of move away from still seeing Gerrard's players just now getting a couple of years older and maybe some of them not quite doing what we thought they were wanting to do and not kicking on, and things as can happen in football. Once we sort of get to the end point of that and we start looking back a bit more, I think people will appreciate even more what happened in that 3-year spell, absolutely, but certainly in that title winning season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely fair to say. And for more kind of tactical point of view, where can we find the book? Give us a wee plug in the book that you brought out.
So the Gerrard book, which thankfully he didn't get sacked before the book came out, which was a blessing because he left when I was trying to release it the first time. So that was a blessing. But the book is available from me. You can get it on heartandhand.co.uk/Gerrard's Blueprint, or you can speak to me on Twitter at Adamski152, and I will sort you out with a link to buy one. It is available on there. Like I said, it does chart this 3-year journey. I try not to make it too much about tactics and methodology and things. There is lots of discussion in there, as I've mentioned, about how the formation changed over the years, how the introduction of sports science and data had an impact, and then about the players. It's always about the players as far as I'm concerned, how they changed. What did Tavernier look like when Gerrard first came in versus what he looked like when he left? What did Morelos look like? How did those evolutions change? What did new signings bring in that had an impact in the team? So all of that is in the book, and if anybody would like to buy a copy of it, then just let me know.
Brilliant. I'll certainly put a link in the description as well. But with 2 episodes left of the journey, we're going to do an episode next week, a full recap of the whole experience and how the club can learn lessons, how the future can be different to avoid a situation like this happening again. And we'll do a Q&A in the last episode. But Adam, I want to thank you for coming on this week's show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
No worries, Scott. It's a pleasure for me too.
Thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in. Please follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. And we have only 2 episodes left of the Rangers journey.